Welcome to the Futures Forum Live online, where we explore the life and times of the emerging future through the eyes of the people working to ensure the sustainable health and wealth of our shared future. Stay tuned for information, education, and inspiration.
Greetings and welcome to this edition of the Futures Forum Live online. It is October and it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so we have a very special series of conversations with some of the people working behind the scenes to make sure we are secure. On today's edition, I'll be speaking with Amelia Estwick Pierre, Dr. Amelia Estwick Pierre, who is director of a National Cybersecurity Institute at Excelsior College and a thought leader for Excelsior College's cybersecurity research, training, and academic initiatives. Prior to this, she was at the Department of Defense as a technical director within the Threat Operations Center and was responsible for monitoring and securing the Department of Defense networks against cyber attacks. One of the things I find very interesting about her work is that in her dissertation, she looked at the concept of a business rules approach for self-healing software architecture. So I clearly want to know what is a self-healing architecture, because I mean, not even Jesus healed himself. So let's see how that really works. So without further ado, I invite you to sit back and enjoy this conversation on our cybersecure futures with Dr. Amelia Estwick. Welcome, Amelia. How are you? How is your day going?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. My day is going well. Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for inviting me for this conversation.
Well, we have a big word, cybersecurity. It's only what, a 12-letter word or so, no, 13-letter word. But we're talking about it because we want to secure our present and our future. I'm focused a lot on the future and the year 2030 in particular, because I'm very focused on if we are to arrive at this new global place of, let's say, peace, security, well, at least more peace than we have right now, more security than we have right now, more health, more education, more well-being for the 8.9 billion people who will occupy the planet at that time, we are going to have to do something different if we're going to be secure. And so I wanted to get a sense of how you think the role of government might emerge, or what's the responsibility of private sector. Where is this? How is this going to show up? From your vantage point, tell me, what matters most to the internet future? Is it going to be the states, nation states? Would it be the private sector, or would it be individuals?
Okay, so great question, actually. And folks have been debating this, right? Who should control this? Who can control that? But at the end of the day, really, because we're dealing with an entity, cybersecurity in cyberspace that has no borders, it really is up to everybody to kind of pitch in. And this has come to the realization. I know when I was in the government, we talked, we were kind of tunnel vision on dealing with government and government entities and, nation states. But now we realize that the threat vector, or what we call the threat vector, and all those threats within the digital space permeates everywhere and everything and everybody. So it's getting to the point now where we realize private industry has a stake in this conversation, as well as government, as well as individuals. So that's why you see this huge push now in our culture of what we call a cyber aware culture, cyber hygiene. A lot of training is happening. They're trying to introduce in the United States. There's a lot of K through 12 planning on how can we get our students to be digital citizens. And so all of these conversations is because people are finally realizing we all have a stake in protecting our personal information, protecting data that we are in touch with throughout our business, other people's information. As you know, in the news, data breaches occur frequently. And we realize a lot of times many of those data breaches are due to, unfortunately, intentional and sometimes unintentional human error. So actually, human error is responsible for 95% of a lot of our attacks, for the most part. So I don't see this really as a stovepipe silos of just government, nation states, and individuals, private industry. I really see this as kind of a comprehensive and a sharing of knowledge of what is going on within the cyberspace?
Well, that's a good place to think about then this concept of the global marketplace and the global challenge for cyber. We have a lot of rules. We have always had rules around, let's say, narco trafficking. We have rules, Interpol. We have rules around how plane flies and what level they should fly. So we have a lot of rules that govern our system. I know there have been developing some rules, obviously, in terms of the internet itself. That's why we have the .ai and we have agreement as to how many more names to give. But we're talking about the internet of things, where everything,
yes,
is gonna have an address, my smart pen. So let's say there are 9 billion people in the world, and each of us has maybe 100 things that are smart that we are either wearing, carrying inside our bodies, or using for where we live our lives, how we cook, how we drive, how we talk, how we hear. What kind of global organizational architecture could you posit, right, that might have to emerge that could be agile and adaptable enough to really deal with this new reality? Most of these global spaces, the UN, the World Bank, the FAO, the NATO, were created in a very static era of between, say, post-World War II, the year 2000, when the internet more or less came into itself, where people realized, oh, this is not just a fad. It's here to stay. It's not going away, right? And now we are on a whoosh curve. So as we think about that, it's everybody, this planetary civilization, the age of the Anthropocene, we call it. We now are changing on the planet. We're changing the way we are. What kind of global human organizational system might we begin to contemplate in order to really help to drive and secure our future?
Right. So that's, again, another great question. When you think about it, we turn to right now our existing international bodies, right? Because they are, even though those agreements are not, we have to kind of ramp them up for 21st century, because technology is moving far, quicker and advancing at a quicker, much quicker pace than we can even write laws for, right? And then it's not only just writing the laws, we have to agree on the laws, right? As you know, right, international laws. So this is not something that happens at a pace, unfortunately, that technology is advancing. So I know there has been a lot of conversations within the international realm dealing with possibly the UN to take this on. But we live in the world where right now cyberspace is so lucrative in the underground, right? And there are, dare I say, nation states who really are making very good money selling and operating in what we call the dark web. So you can't sit here and have folks come to the table if they have this underbelly of criminality, right?
Lies the rub. This concept of
so everyone has to be honest.
You gotta be honest.
You gotta be honest.
Here am I assuming again, if indeed we know we have corruption in all places, right? So we need to resolve ourselves on an assumption that a nation state is necessarily what is called a good country, right? Because a country or a nation state, to some extent, is only as good as the leaders that are leading it, and that could be either political leaders or private sector leaders,
or military leaders,
and not also the leaders either.
Yes,
it could be, as I say, the sole architect on this dark web that said, "Hey, I can make something, and guess what? I can buy off the systems that police me." Because after all, if you look at some countries, the paycheck of an average politician is so small.
Right.
Somebody will say, listen, this law is going to come up to you, just be sick that day and stay home. so you don't vote so it passes, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you know, hey, they might see it as a small thing to do, not quite illegal, not quite, you know, so we have this kind of gray space between what is good and wrong. So we come now to the integrity of what we say, this idea of how then do we not only work with what we have now, but also prepare our citizens for this new space. How are you, as somebody who is now moving to the educational space, right? Has now moved from looking at it from the threat,
Right.
looking at threat vectors from all directions, right? So threats that have emerged yet and preparing not just the technical intelligence around it,
Yeah.
but the integrity intelligence around it.
Yeah.
How do you, as an educator, begin to develop the kind of courseware that can help people answer these questions internally? Because it's an internal question.
Right. So, I mean, really, there is a whole discipline within cybersecurity that discusses cyber ethics, right? And what's ethical, and what you should abide by were principles. So, take for instance, I'm a certified ethical hacker, right? You hear the term hacker, and most folks think negative, but there's actually folks who are doing good for basically working on the behalf of an organization, and they're authorized to hack into their systems to give them what's their strengths and weaknesses are for their cybersecurity, right? Risk, basically, doing assessments. So I think it's that.
So how do I know that you're actually ethical because you're certified? Who certifies the certifiers?
So there are standards, there are certification bodies out there, organizations who have have come up with these various standards within the community, and it's evolving. It really is, because about probably 10 years ago, when I was actually doing this on behalf of the government, there was no such thing as a certified ethical hacker. So we see the landscape changing within the educational space, and we realize we do need people to do these jobs. However, we also need to understand how can we, because we're overloaded with data, right? So networks, there's no way in the world you can monitor everything that goes across the network. So even if you train somebody to understand what we call being an analyst, right? That's kind of your basic within the cybersecurity field, a basic analyst to identify what we call anomalies in the network. The information that's coming through the network, think of everything you do in a day, how many windows you have up, doing various degrees of business. So much data is traversing the network that one person, an analyst, or even a team of analysts are just not going to be able to filter and analyze all that information. So we're training folks, yes, we're educating folks on understanding their certifications you can get within the field, various levels based on skills and knowledge and aptitudes. But at the same token, we realize we're kind of swimming up against, it's like a tidal wave, it's like we're swimming up against the grain here.
Yes.
This is where, you see now the field, a lot of discussions on machine learning and artificial intelligence and so forth, because, big data wasn't really something, data scientists, these terms were not within the cybersecurity space, 5-7 years ago, right?
Yes,
so now you hear of this and you hear the need for this because they realize, you said it too, with all the devices, right? Internet of Things, and it's by 2020, I think the statistic says that we'll have more devices than people on this planet, right? Right, because every person has at least 4 devices, right?
Exactly.
So you're talking about 8 billion people. You're talking about 32 billion devices by 2020. So think of all the information that's flowing on the network. So yes, do we have to train? Do we have to educate? Absolutely. But, we're swimming up against the tide here.
So as we think about artificial intelligence then, because you brought it up, one of the things that we think through is this idea of AI. An AI that can stop hacking can also be used to create hacking. So will AI become a source also of cyber attacks in the future? And so how then do technologists, for example, what Duke is researching, brain-computer interface, how does that begin to help us as humans make sure AI don't kind of go out of control?
So you're talking about the rise of the machine, right? I think that's where
that's my fear. That's my existential fear. Yes.
So I mean, there's so much discussions about this, right? And there's like these camps that people start, you know, kind of putting themselves in these various camps of thought, regarding, you know, rise of the machines and super intelligence and so forth. And you know, especially if you're a sci-fi buff, right? It really starts getting like, oh my goodness, yeah, okay, there you go, you're a Trekkie. That's what I'm talking about. So you know, I see the concern. However, there is still so much of what we call contextual type of information where we can use AI and machine learning to help us kind of filter and identify and categorize the data, but you still need some contextual things, because now you realize to build, so say for yourself, you have a habit online, you have a target profile, you actually do a digital profile, and we are creatures by habit. If you look at data disparately as a person, you may not see that. Well, she goes and uses Facebook between this time and the AM, and then she likes to start doing on her email stuff. You may just have all the data coming from Facebook, and someone else has all the data coming from your email. And AI or machine learning can data mine all that information and then build a profile and go, okay, this particular data set, this is what they do coming from this IP address. So it's looking at all the traffic that may be coming from your home IP address. So we need that information. It's very important. Now on the other side of the fence, which I think you was also stating, is can someone use things for good? Can it also be used for bad? Absolutely, right? This is just life. I think that's the yin and the yang, right? That's what we talk about, right?
Yes,
what's good,
yes.
and it can also be used for bad.
Yes.
But I think the advantages on the good right now far outweighs the bad. But you know, it's one of these things again that's up for debate. I never thought we'll be close to self-driving cars, and look where we at. You know,
well, until they figure the insurance problem, we're not gonna.
Oh yeah, well, but we're a lot further. We're a lot further. Yeah, we got to figure out that the policy. Now, there's governance and policy issues, right? I mean, so that's also a hiccup there that we need humans, right, to help us with, right? An AI is not going to now devise, you know, these type of policies based on you know, it's information that's fed by humans. So yes, what we need is so we go back to the whole question of, are they going to take away jobs? I think that's the next thing people start worrying about. Like, okay, now we have all this, you know, machine learning and robotics, and now we don't need humans, right? So that's kind of starts the thought process. We still need humans. We just need humans to be innovators. And we need to start training folks to not being consumers and being producers. I mean, it's a different mindset, even how we do our educational system. It's almost like we're moving into such what we call a maker society, right? You hear this a lot now.
Yes.
And that is what would need to be training people. It's a thought process. It's a shift in mindset. So I think, yeah, there may be a concern. I don't know in my lifetime though, but you know how that goes.
Well, I mean, we think about it from that perspective, and you're looking at the fact that we have a really rapid change in technology. It is about the intersection, as you said, about people and technology, that the humans are the biggest space. And you think about this idea for cyber war. Do you think that cyberspace could really literally become militarized in 15 years? Do you think it really could happen?
Well, you know, I think there's components we need to be concerned about. There are components we need to be concerned about. I'm talking about our SCADA system. This is our national grids, our power grids, transportation, all of those critical infrastructures that could be used to disrupt and impact millions, right? So in a sense of weaponizing military, militarizing cyberspace, where we're talking about old time war, right?
Yes.
That's kind of not the thought there. The thought is more of how can we now protect our critical infrastructures that impact millions, so we don't have someone contaminating our water supply, and it impacts, 10 million people, 20 million people in the Northeast corridor, and sicken. And then all of a sudden we have this huge pandemic, right? And it infects, so that type of thing. We got to make sure that we shore up our network security. And that's why industrial control systems, cybersecurity and industrial control systems is such a huge conversation now. I'm actually going to be speaking at one of the conferences next month in November that we're going to have in DC. It's cybersecurity and energy utilities, so people are concerned in those aspects of someone nefariously using the internet to damage, control or impact negatively millions of people.
That's certainly what keeps me up at night. Let me keep you up at night, but that does keep me up at night. So when you say then a self-healing software architecture, what exactly are you alluding to? So
we're looking at ways where we can programmatically look at pieces. So today's software is built not from the ground up anymore. That's kind of what we call legacy systems. Software is built in what we call modules or components that are kind of built on top, right? So we have like the software engineering foundation, right, of different tools and software. And then it's easier. It's quicker. It's more economical to just buy it off the shelf and then stick your customized application and on top of it. You see what I'm saying? Instead of building it from the ground up.
So you're saying that my fortune I learned in school is dead?
Well, I'm not. What I'm saying is that software today has to be agile. Like, this is where I was going back and forth about what we talked about technological advances. What I'm saying is today is that creating things, unfortunately, from the ground up is not how we do software. And self-healing is looking at how we now connect basically different pieces of software, which is normally the weakest areas for vulnerabilities, for exploits, and then how can we program on there some type of what we call business rules, where you identify areas of weakness, and then you're able to, if any of those areas of weaknesses are considered, we consider them faults, happen, you're able to recover in a manner that does not involve human intervention. Okay.
So basically, so if you have them, so I can rephrase it so I can get it. So basically, say for example, you're designing a system for the health department, right? Yes. And you have, let's say, a framework that the agency has decided we want to have our systems look like this. This is the overall design of the system. You are then saying we want to use and design now the actual subsets of that framework, that actual work, in ways in which they will be, I will know beforehand that this is weak here, this is weak here, and I'm going to make rules of processing. Yes. So if something happens, the system itself knows, oops, this actually happened, I need to do this.
Right. And how we approach looking at recovering from faults in the past, we used to call them redundancy. So what we do is we'll have a system and we have a backup system.
Yes.
Right? You see what I'm saying? So if the first system fails, then the backup system kicks in. And we realize that that is not the optimized way of probably doing things for processing power, and just for looking at how business is done these days, you know? So there needs to be some mechanism that we build. This is kind of getting into like secure software.
How does this idea relate to what some companies or some articles I've been reading about the kill chain system? How does your self-healing approach relate to this idea of a kill chain analysis system?
Right. So it's funny you mentioned kill chain, because so it's one of these things where the self-healing fits into kill chain, looking at identities and threats. But what I'm looking at is from more of the kill chain is looking at the attack profile. Okay. And I'm looking at systems, you know, modular systems that we put together from the component.
So even
the architecture, how we're building it
in the system itself.
Right.
There are weaknesses sometimes when they're put together.
Yes.
You, the designer, may have inadvertently overlooked something. So you want to build into your program and design certain, say, questions that says, if this and this happen, which I hadn't thought about before, right?
Right.
Or if something happens that I hadn't thought about before, but it could look like this, but I'm not sure.
Right. Then
you ought to do this. And the system itself knows.
Yes.
Oops, this doesn't look like something I'm supposed to pay.
Right. It's an anomaly. It's an anomaly. It's not, this is not considered normal behavior for the system.
So even if it's not necessarily threat related.
Right.
In other words, when I say threat, I mean external threat. In other words, just as how the power could fail, right, in a system. So let's say the power of the hardware could fail.
Yes.
The joint between two softwares could also fail for whatever reason.
I gotcha. Yes.
And you're putting in place this process that says, hey, if this something that looks weird happens, that is against what normally should happen, whatever it is, you don't know what it is.
Right.
But whatever that doesn't look like this, once it is not X, then you need to do something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Got you.
And the kill chain is actually
because as you look at how that might, and that's interesting because as you look at the future, to come back to the future again, we look at then how we're moving into this idea of people looking at how do we speed up processing? How do we look at if quantum computing is not yet quite here because they can't figure out how to recognize where things are. But if you're looking at quantum computing and you're looking at this, well, self-healing, how does that now create a new threat if you have now designed the system to be self-healing? What could happen then if you had something like a quantum computing? Would that pose another type of threat?
Right. So yeah, quantum computing is in its own category, to tell you the truth. And the thing is with quantum computing, the issues a lot of times, you know, coming from I was in the Department of Defense, we actually did a lot of quantum computing research and labs. It's sometimes the threat to quantum computing really is an external threat called heat, because you need considerable power, space, and cooling for all the processing that's going on, right? So in regardless to what you're actually processing, there's actually a real threat. The data centers need to be, you know, being able to handle that type of processing speed. So back to what you were saying about for self-healing, you hear the term a lot, which is similar to what my research was a couple years ago. It says resilience. So we're looking at quantum computing, basically making those decisions quicker. So we said about business rules, it's almost like a decision engine, right?
Yes.
So you have a decision engine going on, and quantum computing coming on can probably make those decisions quicker, whereas it can, you know, mitigate the impact or respond quicker. Okay, so that's the whole point of how we're moving into quantum computing. But there's just a lot of factors with quantum computing, and I know, you know, the department.
I know it's not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're thinking about 20, 25 years out. I mean,
sure.
Because you can't wait until you get there to start thinking, oh, oops, we didn't think about this. Part of the conversation is the fact that we have not done a very good job of anticipating the challenges of computing and technology, because you know, we don't have a robust technology assessment system. And so how are we how are we, what agency, what organizations, what industry sectors are looking at emerging and future threats? Could you share some of what you know about, let's say, organizational, collaborative thinking about the emerging and future threats? What's happening in that space?
So I want to say and be clear that a lot of this, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. So you hear about this in this bubble. And I think what we're doing, where it's a lot of governance discussions, policy. You hear a lot about cybersecurity policy that we just did not discuss before. There's more of a push of data sharing. So the problem, we got to understand what the problem was initially. When someone gets hacked or their networks got infiltrated, they didn't want to say anything to anybody. That's an embarrassment. That's like, oh my goodness, we didn't do what we were supposed to do. But now we're realizing that if we don't share that data, then we're not going to learn, right? So we're not going to know what was used to hack you versus what was used to hack me, and then compare notes to see if these were the same folks and what do we need to do then to protect ourselves.
Yes.
There's power right now in sharing. And I see that's being pushed a lot with private industry and public and private sectors are getting together. So there are organizations that are doing what we call a lot of threat intelligence sharing. How is that being replicated? Everyone else is kind of on the outside waiting to see. You see what I'm saying? So it's one of these things where it's like, okay, we're starting to stand up, and it's been a couple of years now, we stood up kind of these threat intelligence sharing type of organizations that are really controlled by the Department of Defense, because we kind of house so much information. And then there's other initiatives going on with private industry, but I would say this, it's not on a grand scheme. And that's something in the community we just have to work towards.
Yeah, because when you think about the future again,
yeah,
and given that the threat, people might actually be sharing their information.
Oh, absolutely.
What do you call it, dark web? The people in the dark web might be sharing their information. And we look at the fact that we're talking about the need for some, not only national governance, but we're looking for some supranational governance to deal with the supranational, super intelligent threats that are coming upon us. We really have to think critically about how this future might emerge. And so as we wrap up now, I want to ask you, do you think being a woman and a Black woman at the table can actually add some value? And I say this because, the question is, okay, everybody knows there's a conversation on diversity, but is it diversity because we just want to have the numbers of people there? Or is it that there's a particular thinking pattern and thinking style people of different cultural backgrounds bring to the table that allow us to think or ask different questions,
right,
so that we have a more robust, resilient system? What do you think having a more diverse cybersecurity conversation, technology community will do for our more secure futures? How do you think it might help us?
So it's one of these things that I think we just have to be seen. Myself and quite a few other Black women that I know that's in this space, and African-American women of color are in this space. We just constantly have to be seen, and we constantly have to make our voices heard. And it's broadening that participation. I can't explain and even stress upon how it can get pretty you feel a little, not ostracized, but when you go into, say, a invited hacking conference, they invited you and you go in there and you can count possibly, people of color, not even like women, it's just people in color in general, probably on one hand, and then, but the folks who are there need to be very outspoken. The folks that are there need to make sure they're inclusive, because I think you're right. We got into this certain mindset in the community that is not, I could have been told them about data breaches. Like we saw this, Equifax, this is brewing, this has been brewing. So it's, it's one of these things where we just have to make sure our voices are heard. And I think I see some small little needle change in making sure that we have diversity and inclusion, and it's in diversity in thought. right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, exactly. It's the rotating
So,
thought.
so I am saying exactly, because I'm saying if you were, say, for example, and I hate to use it as an example,
yeah,
but if you were brought up as Barack Obama was in Hawaii in a white household, you're probably not going to ask the same questions
no,
if you're brought up in Chicago in the hood. So your idea about, let's say, what could be a threat is different because of where your socialization.
right.
So it's not just being a black female is a black female who went to a particular school and go back to the neighborhood might bring a different understanding of reality, because we don't know what we don't know.
Right. Absolutely.
And so for me, it is very interesting to me to begin to identify the doors through which my concerns might be heard as a citizen of the present and a citizen of the future, wanting to have a better future for all. So as you think about all the things you're working on, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Or are you neutralistic? Which is my word to mean that you're sort of like, you don't want to pick a side. You don't want to stay
No, never, never, never. My whole thing is I'm always optimistic, because my whole thing is, you know, first off, if I wake up the next morning, God willing, and I have a breath, I have a day to change, right? So I look at always being optimistic. And the thing is, in the community, the cybersecurity community, the reason why I say this too is because data breaches have been happening, right? People just didn't report them. Okay, so you don't know. If I never had a premise that my information was private, I always knew, you know, like whatever, my information's out. You have my information. Now I need to do what I need to do to minimize or mitigate any of that impact that may happen if someone was to compromise and actually, you know, use my information.
Yes.
So I think that is kind of a little different thought, where now we're seeing more data breaches and people are like, oh my goodness, why all these data breaches are happening? I'm like, no, they've been happening, but now we have reporting governance in place. So you see how, you know, so now they have to report it. Before they didn't report it. Now they have to report it. So we are moving, you know, a little bit where you see all this information, but because we finally got the governance and policy in place where folks have to provide that information and then give it up to the consumer to find out, okay, now what do I do and how can I protect myself? So that's
so this is why
I'm always optimistic. We're actually, it's moving at a snail's pace, but we actually are kind of moving in a right direction. We just need to broaden the participation at the table for the discussions as we move forward.
Thank you.
You see what I'm saying? So
yeah, definitely. So help me finish this sentence as we close out.
Okay.
By 2030, the future of cybersecurity is
all of us.
All of us.
All of us. We are, as soon as you wake up and you go and use your mobile phone, you are now part of the cybersecurity space, right? Because
or the digital world.
Digital world, absolutely.
So as I anticipate my own, perhaps having my own bionic ear, because if I lose my hearing, I definitely going to get an implant of something.
Right.
I can say definitely when I am 72 years old in the year 2030 that thank God that I paid attention to this conversation back in 2017. And I did my proper, you know, security, my proper security check. And we have in place this system. So thank you so much, Amelia.
Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Amelia, our guest today, folks, has been Dr. Amelia Estwick Pierre. She is the program manager at the National Cybersecurity Institute at the Excelsior College and is a thought leader for Excelsior College. She has also served as an adjunct professor for several online universities, taught several courses such as cybersecurity ethics, information assurance, advanced cybercrime analysis, and is, as she said, a certified ethical hacker. Her doctorate and master's degree are from the George Washington University in computer science, and she's also a proud veteran of the U.S. Army National Guard. So thank you so much again for joining us. And folks, remember, The future is embedded in the landscape of the present. I invite you to be part of the crew that is guiding Spaceship Earth to safe harbor and safe journeys.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Futures Forum Live Online 2017. This podcast aims to tell and share stories about the emerging